Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this April the 24th. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily by calling 1-800-472-0391. Use the weather.gov/Alaska webpage to stay current on weather happenings in your village and community. You can always find links to the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center and breakup conditions around your village as well. And if you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to email me anytime, david.snider@noaa.gov. Here's a look at breakup conditions as of this Wednesday, April 24th. Once again, as you look in the upper Tanana, you can see mostly to some open conditions there, and the same goes for the Nenana. As you look across the Sitna Valley regions and the Copper River Valley, things are open to mostly open, so still looking fairly good there. We do not have a whole lot of new information along the Yukon Valley from tip to tail there, so a lot of new information just poised and ready to start us off on the breakup season for the Yukon. And tomorrow we'll have a new update from Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center hydrologist Crane Johnson. You've seen him on the last two Thursdays. This will make his third installment of the breakup update, and we are pleased and privileged to have his information. He'll be sharing that with us tomorrow during the show, so make sure you're watching if you're along the Yukon for sure, and we'll have some new information there. But it does look like warmer weather is going to be moving into the West Coast over the next week or so, and stay there probably for the next week and a half. So it looks like we will start to see some changes in the region, and again, Crane will have those nitty-gritty details that will help us all stay safe and plan better for the breakup that is to come where you are. Let's take a look at fire danger. Not a whole lot of changes really from yesterday at all. The only real part that caught my attention was in the Copper River Valley, where things have been dry and are starting to dry up, but we're still pulling away from that wetter, cooler, cloudier phase that we've seen across most of the interior and southwest. So as we go through that change, we're going to start to see the fire danger creep back up, I think, across the upper parts of the interior, the upper Yukon, the upper Tanana, and probably around south central, but we're not there yet. So good news. Enjoy the relatively low risk of fire danger at the moment. As we look at the satellite picture across the region, you'll notice a low here around Chirikoff Island, south and west of Kodiak. As that's working its way northward, we're pushing more moisture into the coastal areas of the Kenai Peninsula, Chignik, out toward Prince William Sound and east. But what's really going to take shape is a lot of this moisture is really going to focus in toward central and southern parts of southeast in the next 24 hours and start to give more of southwest and the interior a little bit more of a break. So as we go ahead in time, you'll notice a high pressure system across the Arctic still sweeping an easterly flow across the North Slope. We may see some brief periods of blowing snow, and visibility may go down for just a little bit, but it doesn't look like that's going to last very long at all. Out across the west, you can see the beginnings of our next low pressure wave working into the western Bering. That's going to sweep up a healthy dose of warm and wet air into the Bering Strait communities, eventually the Chukchi Sea, and certainly the western Bering itself. That's also going to break up a lot of the new ice we've been forming here across the regions around St. Lawrence Island, down towards St. Matthew, Norton Sound, and into the Bering Strait itself. So what has been forming is probably not long for this Earth. As we look out across the central and eastern chain, still generally calmer conditions across the region thanks to high pressure being in charge, and that high is going to spread across more parts of the interior as we get into your Thursday and into your Friday. So the really big weather target right now is going to be this low around Kodiak Island, shifting into parts of southeast as we go forward. So watch for that to happen on our maps. Low pressure right now sitting just north of, let's say Eagle to Arctic Valley. This wave of weather is kind of dawdling out here, really keeping a lot of that cold air well to our north. The focus with the jet stream, as you'll see here in a minute in our aviation section, is going to take a lot of that colder air away from Alaska and allow this ridge to really strengthen up quite a bit. High pressure right now is west of St. Matthew and the Pribilofs at 1,027 millibars, well north of Adak and Atka. You can see a lot of the low clouds underneath that as well, really struggling to break up, but we are seeing some changes there with that, so certainly some drier air present. Our low again, south and west of Kodiak at 1,007 millibars. A beauty on the satellite picture, as you saw, but a lot of dry air wrapped up in that. So it's not a very powerful system, and we're only expecting this to turn into maybe gale force as it's working through. It's developing right now. The front, as it works toward the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, Yakutat, and southeast, will be slow to arrive as we get through tonight and tomorrow. It's still not quite there, but out ahead of that, unsettled weather and areas of light rain, probably mixing with some snow at times, and we think as we get into tonight and tomorrow, there's going to be an opportunity for some snow to form in places like Cake, Petersburg, and Wrangell. So watch for that, maybe as much as 1 to 3 inches, but we're not talking about watches, warnings, or advisories, anything like that. You will probably see some new snow, though. A trough of low pressure that we were watching across the Yukon is really losing its power there. So high pressure is starting to take control, the brunt of the cold air now well to the east, and snow showers and clouds may be all that we see across most of the interior and northwest coast. For the regions that clear out, though, fog is probably going to form around the Beaufort Sea. High pressure across the Bering is losing its punch, 1,029 millibars there, so the focus will shift eastward just a little bit as we get into Thursday. That's going to nudge this low eastward as well, closer to southeast, closer to the northern Gulf Coast. And on the back side of this, it's still cold enough for rain and snow to form at higher terrain. That's going to be a slushy snow over the Chugach and the Kenai Mountains. And before Chignik and areas inland a little bit, you may see a rain-snow mix as well. As that high is moving eastward, it'll probably track some low stratus and fog closer to Norton Sound and maybe around the Pribilofs and probably the western chain in those more stable areas. And in between those systems, we still have residual instability. That means clouds could bubble up. You may see some snow showers there where the area is cold enough for that on Thursday, but wouldn't be surprised to see some rain mixing in with that in the interior as temperatures are coming up if anything makes it to the lower terrain. Out across the west now, we've made room for a new low pressure system. That strong southerly draw is going to work northward quickly, and you're going to see more rain across the western Bering in places like Shemya. Winds are going to come up. Watch for that in your marine forecast here in a minute. And again, that's going to have some effects on the sea ice here around the Bering Strait and across the west coast and into the Chukchi Sea. In the meantime, Friday, low pressure is weakening now, but still hovering close to Sitka and the outer coast. It's up to about 1,015 millibars, so not very strong, but enough to kind of keep the slop going across southeast. Meanwhile, many in south central and southwest should see a much nicer day. And in the interior, especially around the Alaska Range and the Deltana Flats and maybe approaching Fairbanks, some residual moisture there could bring in some rain and snow showers there, with warmer air also building well to the south of the Alaska Peninsula. So certainly a different weather pattern than we had this time last week. Low temps tonight, mid to upper 30s for many in southeast. North of Juneau, you're probably looking at lower 30s or close to freezing anyway. About the same for Prince William Sound. South Central, lower 30s. Kodiak, 34. The interior temperatures around Healy, about 15 to low 20s around the middle Tanana Valley, Fairbanks, North Pole, and westward Tanana. One below in Arctic Village, one of the colder spots, and you're looking at temperatures that are probably north of zero, with the exception of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. 20s for Kotzebue Sound, Unalakleet 21, 23 in Nome, 22 around Macoriac, and 26 in St. Paul. Dutch Harbor and Unalaska close to freezing, up to 42 there tomorrow, 35 in St. Paul. Mid to upper 40s for the interior, all the way out toward McGrath at 43, South Central mid 40s, Southeast in the mid to upper 40s. They're pushing 50 in fact around Ketchikan, Craig, and Klawock. Temps in the north in the teens and 20s for Utqiagvik, about 16, 18 in Kaktovik. Overnight low temperatures Friday morning will be cool again. Coolest spots in the north down to about 2 around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 30s in southeast, and much warmer as we get into Friday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. We're looking at widespread MVFR across a large part of the Yukon Valley to Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and down the west coast into parts of Bristol Bay. But most of Bristol Bay right now in the morning should start to begin the day at VFR. Most of the Bering will be MVFR. St. Paul, St. George also under marginal conditions. And then when you look off to the east and southeast, especially southern southeast, will start at IFR with areas in the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, eastward Yakutat, and inside of Shelikof Strait and Chignik, you're looking at IFR to start. As you move eastward throughout the day, again, that IFR will track with you. Look for improvement south and west of AKwx toward Sand Point and down the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Most of southeast will be marginal conditions with IFR creeping into Sitka and just outside of Yakutat and Icy Cape to Prince William Sound. You'll notice the west coast sees improvement outside of Bristol Bay, in fact, and then the west parts of the Brooks Range, Kotzebue Sound, the Koyukuk Valley, and into most of the Bering. Looks like we'll maintain MVFR throughout the day. You'll see continued improvement as we get through Friday. IFR conditions linger around southeast from Cross Sound, the Stevens Passage, the Clarence Strait. Marginal conditions around the interior of the Gulf, but we do see improvement around Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, and east of Kodiak Island. South of the Yukon Valley, in fact over the Tanana Valley, marginal conditions there. The north and west coast, Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, Nunivak Island, all looking at marginal levels in the morning, and then that shifts eastward just a bit. So parts of the Tanana Valley will be dealing with marginal conditions. The middle and upper Yukon look pretty good. Marginal levels across the North Slope, and then the west coast through the Bering Strait and southwest all look to be VFR, with IFR building in across the west with strengthening southerly winds out in the west. Your past conditions then look like this for tomorrow morning. Marginal levels probably last the day around Anaktuvik Pass there, but we should see a little bit of improvement around Adigan Pass as we go through your Thursday. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, also expecting to see at least a little bit of improvement from the morning conditions there at marginal levels, so VFR is certainly possible. A much better chance you'll see a day full of VFR flying through Rainy Pass and for Windy Pass, so good news there. And for Isabel Pass, things look green. VFR conditions expected to go through Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass for your Thursday. For Tenita Pass, look for VFR flying, and Portage Pass right now, especially on the eastern side, looks to be IFR, though Cook Inlet and the western side up through Girdwood right now look to be VFR. Chilkoot White Pass expected to be VFR for your Thursday flying there. Freezing levels show that the surface freezing line has shifted a little bit north across the west. You'll notice those southerly winds coming in across the Bering in the next couple days, really going to drive that northward. So we would expect to see this line over the next couple days creeping northward, but it hasn't started really just yet in earnest. For southeast, the surface freezing line is hovering very close to the higher terrain, right over Juneau, right over Prince William Sound and Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. The 2,000-foot line there just south of Port Alexander and Sitka, and hovering right over Ketchikan and Annette, and still well south of the Aleutians on Thursday morning. Icing potential is up there, and it's starting to climb again, but levels right now wrapped around low pressure in the Gulf are hovering around 2,000 feet across the Wrangell-St. Elias region of Prince William Sound to about 5,000 feet around Kodiak Island, where we see isolated moderate icing potential is really the greatest around the Gulf Coast communities, especially southeast. It's hit and miss across the upper Yukon. Places like Eagle have levels above 3,000 feet right now. And then from Point Hope to Point Lay and down just barely into the Kobuk, Noatak valleys, Kobuk itself, and pushing into the upper Koyukuk Valley, levels there for isolated moderate hovering around 4,000 feet. What about the jet stream? That fast-moving river of air, the main storm path is really saggy and baggy south and west of Alaska. We do have an area of low pressure across the northern Gulf and a potent westerly flow crossing the Gulf around 130 knots and then driving that into the Pacific Northwest, still going strong at 110. The jet stream you see across the northern parts of Canada here is really shunting that cold air away from Alaska. That's going to allow this warmer air to build in, and you can already see that happening at 9,000 feet. South and westerlies building into the western Bering. High pressure across the northwest, low pressure in the Gulf, an onshore flow between 20 and 30 knots here, and gentle northeasterlies for most of the mainland, about 10 to 15. At 3,000 feet, low pressures in the same spot. Those coastal winds there coming in from the east should be watched. 30 to 50 knots there in some isolated locations near Prince William Sound. Light northerlies for most of the mainland, a little bit stronger across the northwest coast thanks to high pressure pulling that in, and stronger winds well south over the Gulf Coast and for outside of the Gulf, I should say, and outside of areas closer to land. So a little bit of turbulence around Prince William Sound below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate there, and also across the western chain. Most areas will have no issues.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your sea ice update now. A lot of this is going to change over the next several days. A strong southerly flow will bring up multiple rounds of warm air into the northern Bering Sea and our Bering Strait communities. So all of this new and young ice that's formed will probably change significantly in the next 4 to 5 days. So watch for that as we talk about sea ice in the next several days. You can check this latest map anytime at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for your Alaska Sea Ice program. Let's take a look at southeast and the marine areas there. On the inside passage, you're looking at about 15 to 20 knots. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal with 4-foot seas and 3 to 4-foot seas elsewhere with a little bit more of a southerly flow. On the outer coast, it's south and southeasterlies coming up a little bit to about 25 to 30 knots around Yakutat and outside of Prince William Sound. South of Sitka, still light winds, 15 knots and about 7-foot seas there, but we are expecting a developing gale with the next round of low pressure moving your way. And we're going to see those seas coming up there to about 9 to 10 feet in most areas. And you can see the circulation here wrapping into Sitka and Cross Sound with an easterly flow out of Cross Sound and up toward Yakutat, 25 to 30, and an onshore push, 15 to 20 with 9 to 10 foot seas. And once again, there may be some fresh snow here in the next day or so around Petersburg, Wrangell, and Cake. As we head into Thursday for south central, northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 20 knots, 4-foot seas, 9-foot seas on the outside with a 20 to 30 knot wind, and northerlies coming down Cook Inlet. That should bring seas up to about 5 to 7 feet on Thursday, but winds settle down a little bit on Friday with a northwesterly flow, 10 to 20 knots. You'll see seas dropping to 2 to 4 feet and 5 to 7-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. And look for a northwesterly flow to diminish to 15 knots with 3-foot seas on the inside of Prince William Sound. Bristol Bay, you're looking at 20 knots, northwesterlies and 4-foot seas on Thursday, light northerlies down the coast with a 4-foot sea there. Northerlies inside of Shelikof Strait, 20 knots and 5-foot seas, 15 to 25 elsewhere across the north and western Gulf. But look for that easterly flow to develop. Again, with low pressure out here in the Gulf and moving towards southeast, we're going to make room for a new low to work northward, and that should just bring up the winds there south of Sand Point to Falls Pass to about 30 knots and an 11-foot sea ahead of that with a northeasterly flow starting to bend in toward that low by Friday. 3-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast. For the Aleutians, a north and easterly wind primarily driven by high pressure over the Bering will keep winds to about 15 to 25 knots or so, a little bit stronger because remember, there's a low pressure system way down here in the south that's starting to build and draw this in. So we'll see some of those changes already in the chain. 4 to 7 foot seas therefore Thursday out in the west. You're getting into that stronger southerly return flow that's working into the Bering with that warm air. Already looking at 9 foot seas and 35 knot winds from the south and east on Thursday. Still about southerly 30 knots there or so on Friday with a 13 foot sea. And once again, building winds and seas south of the chain in response to low pressure that's still down to the south. 13 foot seas there south of Nikolsky and Unalaska with an east and southeasterly flow for the Bering Sea coast and generally small seas and light winds the further north you go. For the west coast then, it is light winds over Norton Sound, 5 knots over the ice or so. Northerlies for Nunivak Island, St. Matthew and the Pribilofs. About 15 knots the further south you go, and 3 foot seas all the way into the Kuskokwim Delta on Thursday. For Friday, light winds along the coast, 5 knot winds coming into Norton Sound from the west, but southerlies are building around St. Matthew Island and certainly off to the west. You can see the higher seas there. St. Paul and St. George still holding on to 15 knots with 3 foot seas and light northeasterly winds in the Kuskokwim Delta, 10 knots and only 2 foot seas there on Friday. For the Beaufort Seacoast, high pressure up north is still strong and strong enough to drive a lot of wind across the north coast with that 15 to 20 knots there, but light southerlies are coming up the Chukchi coast, only 10 knots over the ice expected there. As we get into Friday, the winds go light across the Beaufort, 5 to 15, almost slack in fact, and southerlies start to build across the Chukchi, so we just kind of flip things over a little bit. Southerlies 15 to 20 on Friday for the Chukchi coast. Let's recap your weather tonight. Low pressure is building to gale strength across the central and eastern Gulf as that pushes a front toward the northern Gulf Coast and southeast. We should expect some mixed precipitation here across southern parts of the Panhandle tonight and tomorrow, and it may be cold enough at times around Cake, Petersburg, and Wrangell to pick up about an inch to maybe as much as 3 inches of snow. At this time, there's no watches, warnings, or advisories for any part of southeast, especially those places. But winter's not quite through with your area just yet either, so be careful and do expect a little bit of snow. Across the north and western coast, we are expecting periods of rain and snow to mix, but it does look like the overall weather situation for most parts of Alaska will be warming up. As high pressure takes command, the sun will beat down and temperatures will come up. Around Friday, we expect showers of rain and snow, perhaps across the interior. Most of south central and southwest will see plenty of sunshine, and many across the Yukon Valley and northward will see additional sunshine as well. Out west, a building area of low pressure will drive in warmer weather to the northern parts of the Bering and the Chukchi, and ice conditions will change.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.